This session is on tips and tricks for the TI-84 calculator. Hi, I'm Tyra, an educational blogger, curriculum designer, and owner of Algebra and Beyond. I have a bachelor's in business, a master's in education, and over 15 years of teaching experience. I love creating resources to help students connect knowledge with understanding, one lesson at a time. I hope you enjoy my session. There will be several handouts that I'll be using throughout this session that you can download for free and use with your own students. As you watch this session, if you think of any questions you have for me, please feel free to email me at tyra@algebra-and-beyond.com. You may be wondering, why are we going to teach calculator skills? Shouldn't students be able to do everything on their own with paper and pencil? Well, you're going to find out there are 4 main reasons why teaching these calculator skills is very useful and important for students. The first reason it is important to teach calculator skills is because of speed. After students have mastered a skill, teachers can allow the use of a graphing calculator to compute, graph, or create a table of values quickly. The second one is for connections. The use of a graphing calculator is to help students make connections among different representations of mathematical models. Users can quickly maneuver between tabular, graphical, and algebraic forms. The third is checking for accuracy. Many concepts taught in algebra can be checked using a graphing calculator. Therefore, students are able to confirm or possibly disaffirm their solutions. And the fourth is leaping hurdles. Without technology, it is nearly impossible for students who have few skills and little understanding of fractions and integers to study algebra in a meaningful way. With technology, all students have the opportunity to study mathematics. The first topic we will discuss are some basic keys on the TI-84 calculator. The first thing I do is give my students a blank template of the TI-84 calculator to help them label important keys. I've gone ahead and highlighted some of the ones that I think are most helpful. So for example, if we start with the second button, it's used to access the blue functions. So we're talking about second quit, second off, any of the functions that you see in blue above the keys. Another one is alpha. Okay, this one is used to access the green functions, as you can see over here. Okay, and then the variable key. You type the variable x. So when they're graphing a function, it will be representing any x variable. Also, we have the negative sign. Students can be confused between subtraction and the negative sign. So this helps them remember that they need to use this for a negative number. And then the graphing keys. Okay, these are the 5 keys that they will use when they are graphing. There is also extra space on the template so students can add notes as they learn more keys, and they may refer back to it throughout the math course. Next, let's discuss the math menu. It's located just below the alpha key. The next tip I want to share is helping students understand how to use the math menu. I use this menu to help students check their work. This is not to replace any understanding or comprehension of these processes, but it does help them when they're completed with their work, checking it to see if they have the correct answer, or if it doesn't match, they can go back and find their mistake. All right, so for the first one, sometimes students want to write expressions in the calculator in fraction form. And to do so, they will click on alpha and then y equals, and I can have that in the tips section right here. And we have n divided by d, which means the numerator divided by the denominator. So we'll select number 1. And I'm going to go ahead and put in 4/5. And then I can click enter. And when I type in my expression in fraction form, the answer will then be in fraction form as well. Now, if a student would like to change this to decimal form, they can go back to the math menu, and we're going to mainly discuss in these first few the math option. So in this one, we can click on number 2 or choose 2, and it will take the previous answer, enter, and it will give us the decimal form. Okay, just like we did it this way, we can also do opposite, where we enter in an expression. So for example, we're going to enter this expression in. So 5 plus 4 minus 2 divided by 3 times 2. Enter. And it will give us a decimal. Students often want to have this in fraction form. So again, we'll go to the math menu. And this time we're going to choose 1 for fraction. It'll take that answer and change it into a fraction. Okay, some other keys in the math menu math section option. If we want to, for example, cube something, let's cube 5, then we'll click on math and we'll choose number 3. Often we teach students to use the caret, but sometimes this is a little bit quicker. So I'll choose 3. And it will cube number 5 for me to be 125. I can also do cube root. So I can go to math, select number 4, and I can do the cube root of 27. And it will give me the answer. And I like to help students use these techniques, like I said, to check their work. Now we're going to look at the number option in the math menu. So we'll start with absolute value. Often I've noticed students will get maybe an operation or expression that's 10 minus 7, or the absolute value of 10 minus 7, and they think that they just change this to a positive and they should get 17. Okay, so when students get that, it's always good for them to, again, have a way to check their work. So we'll go into math, and now we're going to talk about the number option. And we'll choose absolute value, which is number 1, and we put in our expression. Enter. And there they'll notice that they must have done something wrong. Another one is rounding. Students often forget how to round. So sometimes it's good for them to say, okay, did I do this right? Let me check. So for example, we'll go back to the math menu, arrow over to number option, and we'll choose number 2, round. And let's just round pi. And again, teaching them to use the second key, pi, and then we'll do comma, and choose how many decimal places. And you can see it rounded for us. So that's a good way for them to check. Also, when students add or subtract fractions, finding the least common multiple can be challenging. So there's also an option for that in the math menu. And we're going to do number 8, the LCM. And we can choose our 2 numbers that we're trying to find. So let's say 7, 12. It will give us the least common multiple as 84. You can also do this for the greatest common divisor. And then also remainders. This is a great way for students to check their long division. So for example, if we wanted to say, well, what's 112 divided by 15? Okay, we don't really know what the remainder is, and it's difficult for students to check their long division this way. So one of the easiest ways to do it is going to the math menu, number, and arrow down till we get to remainder. And then we'll select what were our dividend divided by the divisor, which is 15, and enter. And it'll say, based on this division, 7 should be our remainder. So those are some basic things for the math menu that are very helpful for students. Next, I want to share some tricks for the test menu. You can activate the test menu by clicking on second and then math. Now let's take a look at the test menu. The test menu determines if expressions are equivalent. The first one we're going to look at is simplifying numerical expressions. One of the ways in which students can check if they've simplified something properly is using this test menu. So you're going to start with putting in the original expression. Then you need to go to choosing the second button, math. We want to find our equal sign. And then we'll put in the simplified expression that we came up with. So if I simplified it, I had it as the answer 42 square root 2. And when I click enter, if I get the number 1, I know that it's true. If I would have gotten 0, I would have known that my simplification was incorrect. This is extremely helpful for students to, again, help check their work. Now let's look at algebraic expressions. As you know, students advance into higher levels of math and they will need to simplify algebraic expressions, which include variables. So how do we do this? Because B and C currently don't represent numbers. So we're going to have to store some number for those variables. So we'll go into store. Oops, first we got to type our number. And again, I have in parentheses here that you want to use odd primes are best. So I'm going to type in 3, store, and then I'm going to choose the letter B. So I need to click my green button alpha and letter B, and then enter. Okay, and then it will be stored. Then I'm going to store the number 5 for C. All right, so I've said that those variables represent those numbers. Now, if I type in my expression, I'm going to type it in as a fraction. So I have 15. I'm typing the original algebraic expression in. And C cubed, alpha C cubed, and my denominator is 5bc squared Then I'm going to again use second math, my equal sign, and I'm going to type in my simplified expression to see if it's correct. And I had 5. And actually, let's put something incorrect just to double check. So let's say I had alpha b, and let's say I came up with 5b squared c. And you can see that the answer is 0, so that means it's false. So the student could go back and say, okay, I made a mistake, I'm going to go back and check it. All right, and the last one I want to look at is solving for a variable. Again, we're going to have the student find their answer, and then we're going to store their answer as another letter. So I'm going to say my answer was -6, and I'm going to store that for letter D. Okay, once it's stored, now I can put the original equation in, which was 5 alpha D plus 3. Then I'm going to do my second math, and I want to put the equal sign again, and then I have the equation -3 plus 4D. And it confirms that when D is -6, these two expressions are equal to each other. And I know when students do one-step or multi-step equations, this can be very helpful. So that is wrapping up the test menu basics. Next are some graphing basics. I know that when I teach my students for the first time how to graph on the TI-84 calculator, it takes almost the whole period because either their calculator isn't set up right or they have no idea what to do. So hopefully these tips will help you. Here are a few tips that will really help your students graph more efficiently. When your student types in an equation to graph, they type it in, then they click graph, and sometimes I've noticed students all the time, my graph, it's not there, I can't see the x and y intercept. Sometimes you can, the window settings do get a little off kilter, so we need to quickly see if we can just do a standard setting to see if we can see the full graph. So if we go to zoom, the best one to choose is 6 standard, okay? And now I can see at least the y-intercept. Okay, now the student might say, well, I still don't know what the x-intercept is. So I love to give them this graph. Okay, so I say, well, what do you need to see more of? Okay, we need to see more x values. So I'm going to adjust the x max. So I'll go to the window, and I'll adjust my x max to a larger number, and I'm going to just select 20 to see if I can view my x-intercept. And once I graph, I can see that I do. So having them easily be able to adjust the window is really helpful when they're graphing. Now, another helpful view for the students is being able to see the table and the graph all in one window. So I'm going to go to Mode, and I'm going to change it right here. It says Full Horizontal or Graph Table. So I'm going to select Graph and Table, and I'll go back to my graph, and now I can see my table, which is very helpful for students when they're looking at parts of the graph and coordinates. So another thing is I've noticed that I have some half points here, and I also want to do like negative 5.5 or negative 4.5. So I can adjust my table setup. So I'm going to choose second window for my table setup, and I want to change it to 0.5 here for the change in table. Okay, it assigns the different increments for the x values. And then I'm going to go ahead and back and graph, and I can even find more coordinates for when identifying parts of the graph. Also, one thing that I know students in my class have found frustrating is you can't easily graph a vertical line on the graphing calculator. And being able to do so really helps when, for example, visually for them to see it, and also maybe when you're doing systems of equations. So there is a way, and for example, you have to choose a large number here. So I'm going to just choose some large number. Then you put parentheses. So if I want to graph the line x equals 4, I'm going to do x minus 4, parentheses, and I'm going to click graph. And there you can see the visual. And again, I want a better window, so I'll tell the student zoom, 6 for standard, and I can see it a little bit clearly. Okay, so those are some graphing basics that can just make navigating graphs easier for your students, identifying the table, different parts of the window, and even being able to graph a vertical line. And my last tip is how to graph linear inequalities on the graphing calculator. When I have students graph linear inequalities, I have them do it on graph paper and then shade above or below depending on the inequality, and then I even have them use a test point to confirm. I've noticed though that they really appreciate being able to also do this on the graphing calculator to visualize it even further and double check their work. So to do that, we're going to type in the equation or the inequality, 3x plus 1, and we need to adjust where we're going to shade, right? So we're going to go arrow over, and in this case it's less than or equal to, so we're going to click enter so we can adjust this, and instead of a line we're going to choose the shading below. So we'll arrow over, and now we have that. So we can go ahead and graph. Our window seems accurate. And this really helps them see if they shaded their graph properly. Okay. Also, it can help them find some points, some coordinates. For example, if they were given an ordered pair, that is it true or false? Is it a solution? They can arrow around and find out, right? They can see if it would fall in the shaded region. Because sometimes when they graph on their paper, it's not necessarily, they might be off a little bit based on their lines and how far their graph paper is. So they can even find the test points. But please note that the graphing calculator does not do dashed or solid lines. It will always just do a solid line. As you can see, this is also very useful for when students are doing graphing linear systems of inequalities. They can easily see the shaded region where they overlap. This really helps with speed when they're doing many problems and also checking for accuracy. This is a great handout to give them to help them remember their steps and practice it over and over. Thank you for watching my session. I hope these tips and tricks for the TI-84 graphing calculator help your students with speed, making connections, checking for accuracy, and leaping hurdles. Don't forget to check out my blog at algebraandbeyond.com for more tips and ideas for your math classroom. Have a great day!